Remember the good old days when all it took was a colorful cartridge, a comfy couch, and a lukewarm soda to feel like the world was saved? Yeah, I'm talking about Super Nintendo RPGs. These weren't just games. They were epic 16-bit adventures that felt bigger than life itself. Before open worlds, hyper-realistic graphics, and 100-gigabyte updates, what we had was pure magic. Pixel by pixel, note by note, every moment was unforgettable. So buckle up, because today we're diving straight back into the golden age of RPGs, the ones so incredible that even the villains were more charismatic than a lot of modern heroes. Before Tales of Arise, before Symphonia, even before we knew what a skit was in an RPG, Tales of Phantasia was already there, paving the way with pure 16-bit brilliance. Released in 1995, it was the game that looked at the Super Nintendo and said, "I can go beyond this." And it truly did. It dared. It had digitized voices, a vocal soundtrack, all packed into a cartridge. Its story mixed time travel, drama, and friendship, delivering a fluidity that few RPGs of that era could match. While many relied on traditional turn-based battles, Tales of Phantasia introduced the linear motion battle system, a real-time combat that turned each fight into a small action spectacle. And the most impressive part? All of this fit into a 48-megabit cartridge, a technical feat that made the Super Nintendo work as hard as Kless, trying to save the world through the third timeline. Even today, Phantasia remains an RPG that has aged with elegance. Revisiting it is like returning to a pixelated village and realizing the magic is still alive there. Now, we understand even more the weight of choices, of losses, and of course, the soundtracks composed by Moto and Sakuraba, which still sounds simply magical. Before Cloud, before Squall, before any existential crises wielding giant swords, there was a group of heroes who simply enjoyed saving the world. Final Fantasy V is the kind of RPG that doesn't need drama to be extraordinary, just a solid jobs system and a soundtrack by Nobuo Uematsu for the magic to happen. Released in 1992, it took everything Final Fantasy IV did well and elevated it to a new level of customization. The class system was so deep it felt more like a strategic playground than a traditional RPG. You could combine abilities, switch roles during the adventure, and turn any character into almost anything. Mage, knight, dancer, ninja, or even a ninja dancer mage if your imagination allowed. What truly makes Final Fantasy V special is the balance between lightheartedness and challenge. The story is simple: crystals, kingdoms, and a villain who seems to enjoy chaos a little too much. But the group's charisma and tactical freedom create one of the purest experiences of the 16-bit era. It was the kind of game that rewarded experimentation, failure, and trying again with an even wilder idea. Today, many call it the forgotten one between the fourth and sixth installments. But for those who truly experience the adventure, Final Fantasy V is that childhood friend who maybe wasn't the most popular, but was the one that made you fall hopelessly in love with RPGs. If the Super Nintendo had a game that hid how advanced it was for its time, that game would have been Star Ocean. While other RPGs were still limited to simple cutscenes, the Enix team asked themselves, what if we put voices in a Super Nintendo cartridge? And that's exactly what they did. The game was a true technical feat: audio compression, detailed graphics, and real-time battles that made it feel like the console was about to take off. What truly made Star Ocean special was its ambition. A fusion of science fiction and medieval fantasy, different planets, advanced technology, and a touch of human drama worthy of a space soap opera. It was an RPG that made you think, seriously, this runs on a Super Nintendo? And even with all that boldness, the game retained soul and heart. Each character had their own narrative arc, unique interactions, and that special charm only 16-bit RPGs could offer. Star Ocean was not just a technical milestone, it was a promise of what RPGs could become. Even today, many modern titles try to recreate the same sense of discovery that it delivered back in 1996. Check out this spectacle, a Sailor Moon RPG. And no, it's not a fighting game or some random spin-off. It's a true JRPG, with turn-based battles, status effects, magic, and a story that, for many fans, is still considered canon. Sailor Moon: Another Story surprised everyone because no one expected it to be so good. It took the colorful, magical universe of the anime and turned it into a surprisingly dark narrative, where corrupted versions of the Sailor Scouts themselves appear to face you. It was like a dark multiverse years before that became trendy. The battle system was simple but full of style. Combo attacks, special powers, and that delightful feeling of seeing the whole team shine in 16-bit sprites. And, of course, the transformation animations were a spectacle. The Super Nintendo almost struggled to handle so much digital stardust. The game had heart, it had drama, and above all, it respected the original material, treating each character with the same strength and sensitivity shown in the anime. Sailor Moon: Another Story is proof that even an anime-based RPG could have depth, emotion, and a healthy dose of cosmic magic, all in the name of the moon and 16-bit glory. Let's talk about an RPG that seemed to come straight from the imagination of a brilliant child, Robotrek. And I'm not exaggerating, the game is pure creativity, packed into a cartridge that received little attention at the time. While most of the Super Nintendo was filled with heroes wielding magical swords and apocalyptic prophecies, Robotrek offered something completely different. Here, you didn't fight warriors, wizards, or monsters, but robots that you built yourself. Parts, chips, upgrades, all customizable. It was like Pokemon and Mega Man had merged into a futuristic engineering project. The story was light, almost comical, with that Japanese humor full of absurd situations and eccentric characters. But what truly shone was the combat system. Turn-based, yet dynamic and full of possibilities. Creating different robots for each situation, one faster, one more durable, or specialized in long-range attacks. And discovering which worked best was half the fun. Visually, the game had the colorful, charismatic charm of Queenette, the same studio behind Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia. Every environment seemed carefully crafted, and the soundtrack completed the atmosphere of a relaxed, futuristic adventure. Robotrek may not have become a phenomenon, but it's one of those hidden gems that showed just how bold the Super Nintendo could be. A console capable of letting you dream up any kind of world, even one where the fate of humanity depended on a boy, a screwdriver, and a whole lot of imagination. We're looking at a true classic that practically defined the concept of adventure in the 90s, Breath of Fire. It's the kind of RPG that starts simple, a hero, a village, a world in danger, but gradually draws you into a story full of twists, mythology, and moments that felt far bigger than what a cartridge could contain. Capcom, known for Street Fighter and Mega Man, proved here that it could craft stories with real soul. In Breath of Fire, you play as Ryu, a young man with the mysterious ability to transform into a dragon. And let's be honest, back then, nothing could have been more exciting. Even the supporting characters stood out. Each had a unique ability outside of battle, adding charm and strategy to exploration. The game world truly felt alive, full of secrets, temples, and creatures that seemed straight out of ancient legends. The soundtrack was a spectacle on its own, simple yet powerful, with melodies that stayed in your mind in every village and tense moment. Even after all these years, Breath of Fire still delivers something that many modern RPGs fail to: heart and emotion. It's the kind of game that doesn't try to impress only with graphics, but with feeling. And in the end, it leaves that unique sense of emptiness. The same emptiness that only the great Super Nintendo RPGs knew how to evoke. Soul Blazer is one of those RPGs that few people had the chance to play, yet it remains vivid in the memory of those who did. While many Super Nintendo games limited themselves to sending you on a mission to defeat an evil villain, Soul Blazer went far beyond that. It invited you to rebuild the world, piece by piece. With each monster defeated, imprisoned souls were freed, and entire towns slowly came back to life before your eyes. It was a unique blend of action, redemption, and poetry, all accompanied by a soundtrack that felt like it descended straight from the heavens. You took on the role of a warrior sent by a divine entity to restore balance to a world devastated by human greed. And as simple as it may sound, the game's emotional depth was striking. Each liberated town had its own story, sometimes beautiful, sometimes tragic, but always infused with that touch of hope that only Quintet's classics could convey. The combat was simple, direct, and incredibly satisfying. And watching the world gradually rebuild itself, piece by piece, had an almost magical effect. Soul Blazer may not have reached the same level of recognition as titles like Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy, but in terms of soul, it stands among the very best. It's proof that the greatest RPGs aren't just about defeating evil, they're about restoring light and hope to a world that once seemed lost. It's time to talk about one of the most impressive and ambitious RPGs ever to grace the Super Nintendo, Trials of Mana, later known as Seiken Densetsu 3. This game was, in a way, Square's rebellious child. Too beautiful for its time, too large to fit in a cartridge, and far too good to have remained confined to Japan for so many years. From the very beginning, Trials of Mana let you choose 3 protagonists out of 6 available, and that choice completely changed the story, the bosses, and even the endings. It was like having several RPGs in one, a rare boldness for the Super Nintendo era. All of it came wrapped in vibrant graphics, stunning light effects, and a soundtrack that felt straight out of an epic fairy tale. Terranigma is, without a doubt, a game that overflows with soul. While most Super Nintendo RPGs put you on a mission to save princesses or defeat villains, Terranigma went far beyond that. It invited you to relive the Earth itself. The adventure begins in the depths of the planet, in a remote village called Krista, with no idea of what lies beyond. But once the doors of the world open, everything changes. You begin rebuilding continents, resurrecting animals, helping cities thrive, and witnessing the evolution of humanity before your very eyes. Every action carries a metaphor about the cycle of life, showing that everything that is born must one day die in order to be reborn. Ark, the protagonist, is not a traditional hero. He is curious, rebellious, full of doubts, a reflection of humanity itself, which he seeks to rebuild. His journey is deep, poetic, and surprisingly dark for a 1990s game. The gameplay system is dynamic and fluid, reminiscent of a fusion between The Legend of Zelda and intense action, with combos, magic, and enemies that demand skill and strategy. The animations are smooth, and the area designs, from tropical forests to futuristic ruins, convey the feeling of a living world. The soundtrack is simply unforgettable, simultaneously melancholic and full of hope. Unfortunately, Terranigma was never officially released in the Americas, remaining between Europe and Japan as a precious secret, shared only among passionate RPG fans. Perhaps that is what made the game so legendary, a hidden treasure that leaves an eternal mark on those who discover it. If the Super Nintendo had a soul, it would probably be called Terranigma, a game about creating worlds, losing everything, and still believing in rebirth. Before the great open worlds and branching storylines, there was an RPG that captivated with its simplicity and genuine emotion. Lufia and the Fortress of Doom seemed modest. Simple graphics, classic turn-based battles. But behind that 16-bit appearance was a story that began at the end. Yes, first you heard the legend of the final battle, and then you experienced what happened 100 years later. This inversion of expectations, bold for the early 90s, gave the feeling of exploring the scars of time, of a world that had already been saved, but had not yet found peace. The storytelling was straightforward, yet full of soul. Every dialogue had a human touch, and the bond between the hero and Lufia became the heart of the journey. It was a love story that grew slowly, without rush, and ended in a way impossible to forget. Even with a simple system, Lufia captured the player with that something extra that few games had. The feeling of living a story that truly mattered, even inside a small, limited cartridge. If Final Fantasy was the epic, Lufia was the handwritten letter. Imperfect, but full of heart. A reminder that not every RPG has to be grandiose to be unforgettable. Now, a quick pause from nostalgia. Because I have to ask you something. Have you ever noticed that liking a video like this is like using a phoenix down from Final Fantasy on the algorithm? Seriously, every like resurrects the channel for another turn. And if you subscribe, it's like unlocking a new limit break. Except this one you can use as many times as you want. So go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below which of these Super Nintendo RPGs you think has aged better than the Castle Wine in Final Fantasy VI. I promise I'll read everything. Even the wildest comparisons.